the screen. I am going to. I'm gonna move it in and we can go. All right. If we could get Kathy off the screen. Thank you. Okay, so good morning. This is a meeting of the Oregon Water Resources Commission, day 2 of our November meeting. It's November 18th, 2022. We're reconvening in the public section of this meeting. And one logistics item before we launch into the agenda. For those of you physically present in the room, remember that the microphones are super sensitive and they will pick up even super quiet side conversations at the table or even back there where the audience is sitting. So just bear that in mind as you're sitting here. So our first agenda item is commissioner comments. And Commissioner Lee, would you like to start? I'm thinking we'll just go along the table and we'll insert Commissioner Quimps in there along the way too. Oh, one more thing, Commissioner Quimps, for those of you who are participating virtually, is also participating virtually.
Okay. Last week I attended the Oregon Water Law Seminar and it was quite enlightening as to issues that people have before them. There was one session where Representative Helms and Owens talked about some possible future actions that would occur to help on water. And as many of you have seen in the media, 7 out of 10 people think that water is now a big issue in Oregon. So one of the proposals they talked about was having what is called grant getters in the governor's office to both seek and coordinate grants that natural resource agencies could make available to constituents. Another one was looking at possibly developing a water plan, state water plan. Oregon is one of the few states that doesn't have a state water plan, and that was something they showed an interest in. Another one was having regional water courts. Colorado and some other states have these regional courts where water right issues are resolved without having to get into the legal courts. So those would be tools that possibly could help us in the future. And storage was brought up by a number of people at the seminar. And I know we're starting to look at that ourselves as a solution, not only for water supply, but for fish and other benefits and municipal water supply. And another issue that came up was water reuse. Many states use water reuse or reclaimed water as a supply. And Oregon has done some of that, but to a fairly low amount of use, as as you know, from the municipality. And lastly, I would say that just recently I was appointed to an advisory committee for the Oregon Global Warming Commission, developing its program on natural and working lands. And we are hoping that the carbon sequestration goals that were in that September 2021 plan that you can see on their website would allow for people on their land to promote carbon sequestration, which would help with reducing greenhouse gas. So with that, I'll pass it on to Commissioner Mull.
Thank you. In September, I was able to travel to Washington, D.C. to lobby with other members of the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts on behalf of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, a big source of land acquisition funding that goes from everything from city parks and playgrounds to large landscape conservation programs. And it's a trip I've made each of the last 2 years in succession. And over that time, the discussion around the link between investments in land and water in the natural state as green infrastructure and the integration of that in traditional gray infrastructure has reached the point where you get the head nod, people understand it, even the Office of Management and Budget, and it is being worked into and funding is going in that direction. And I just feel very encouraged that in Oregon especially, we're starting to see that where investments in in-stream flow, investments in floodplain restoration as water holding capacity are being fully integrated into city water management plans, especially on the Oregon coast, where a lot of people don't realize that how water limited they are and how much management of the upland forests really does contribute to water production. That was really encouraging. And then to come to the meeting yesterday and the preparatory materials, get that list of, I think, 76 different actions that are being tracked relative to legislative support during this last legislative session for water, and to see that 2/3 of those actions are either on target or complete, and that the other ones that are perhaps behind schedule or concerned, there's full awareness and good discussion around that was also really encouraging. I just want to applaud staff for really buckling down and taking that on, because on top of sort of keeping the hamster wheel moving, adding all these other things in such a timely fashion has just been tremendously encouraging. And I do feel like it's our role and responsibility to make sure that the legislature hears that this can't just be a one-time Christmas gift, that this is, we're at a level of base funding now that we need to find creative ways, grants and others to keep this momentum moving. Specifically yesterday, it was great to hear from Rachel and Tony and Chris and Danielle and Crystal and Adair and Kim, and to see that in that we've seen that square managing for things that are urgent and important, that we're still in a lot of those urgent, important areas at the same time that we're in that quadrant 2 where not urgent, but extremely strategically important. And to see that kind of vision playing out on the ground was just, again, really encouraging. And I guess the last thing that discussions yesterday and already today have brought to bear is that I think I'm a particularly hopeful person, just Peter Pan that way. But I do recognize that we're at a point now with water where we need to stop hoping that it's going to continue to rain, because we're faced with data and trends that it's different than it was in 1850. And we need to face that squarely and act on that. And don't worry about hoping that it's going to rain. It'll come, but it's not going to come like we thought it did. And we need to act accordingly. And I want to thank staff for organizing the visits yesterday afternoon to just see 3 local examples, everything from the state data center and efficiencies and resiliency there, to the Oregon Fruit Company and the water savings practices they're implementing, to then Gilgamesh Brewery, and the same thing, that recognition that we have to get ahead of this now. So I'm feeling very encouraged, but also very wide-eyed about the work that we have ahead of us. finally, I just want to really thank Nirvana Cook for making this kind of hybrid meeting still possible. The last 2 years have been really challenging. I think just in the last 24 hours, we see how much more productive it is to be together. And yet we want to be able to offer people not having to travel and able to travel. So thanks, Nirvana, for really making this work.
Thank you, Commissioner Wall. Thank you, Joe.
Wow. Well, ditto to Joe and Jan, very, very well said, and agree that we are in a time where we're gonna have to start making some very difficult decisions, and that's gonna be tough, and it's gonna take us to continue to be courageous and strong to move forward, because again, like Joe said, we can't just continue to hope that it'll change and go back to what we thought was normal. And I was also very impressed with our tours yesterday, and in particular the fruit packing company. They let us know that with the improvements that they made on efficiency, on water efficiency, they've been able to reduce their use there on water by 50 to 90%, which is incredible. And so it's a huge testament to the city of Salem, who also helped them make those changes. I believe they got a grant to help pay 20%, what I remember, of the cost, but that savings is gonna go on for many, many years, and really puts them in a place where if we do have, significant water shortages, that they're already there. They've made those improvements, they've made those changes, and so they won't be as impacted. Talking about the southwest region in Southern Oregon, there's been a lot of projects going on in that region to, as far as water efficiency, reliability, seismic improvements to infrastructure in the area. A lot of canals and irrigation districts are being piped. A lot of collaboration is happening between some of these irrigation groups too. So that's encouraging to see as well. And then that whole area with the Water Commission, Medford Water, along with the city of Jacksonville and Eagle Point and Central Point and Talent and Phoenix and Ashland have all come together to and signed an intergovernmental agreement on water rights. And so it is now a practice of sharing the water resources, the water rights in the area, and help to provide reliability, help some of the other cities who, those partner cities that we have, not have to go out and get more water rights. We can all pool those water rights together and help each other as a region, looking at our supply as a regional issue and challenge. And it also provides some tools in the future for helping with shortages during drought, which we have experienced quite a bit in the past few years, or really the past 10 years, but significantly in the last 3 years. I'm encouraged to see that we had a good start to the water year. We got quite a bit of rain, we've got some snow, we've had a little lull in the last couple of weeks, but it's been nice and cold. Really want to hope again that that's going to continue. And another thing that's happened in our area, I know everyone has been pretty concerned with bulk water sales, and we have been tracking those sales in our system, and they have decreased by over half. And I think that it's a combination of the funding for law enforcement, House Bill 3041 that was implemented that requires municipalities to track where the water is going when it's being delivered. And so I think it's really had an effect and has curtailed that usage, and we've seen it go down by at least half. And so that's pretty impressive from last year and years in the past. So I'm really glad to be a part of this period of time, even though it's really a difficult time. It's very challenging, but it's again encouraging to see our region trying to come together and find solutions in collaboration with each other instead of working against each other, and not reinventing the wheel, and helping each other get through all these challenges. So glad to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, again, ditto to everybody else. Things I've kind of been aware of and noticing in, the Bend, Central Oregon area. Seeing the collaboration between irrigation districts, I think that is starting to pay off. They had kind of a rocky start to their, water bank this year, but there's already plans on how to improve it, get more participation in it next year to make sure that, small farms in the Central Oregon Irrigation District can basically send their water to North Unit Irrigation District, which is the junior user on the system, and that is where a lot of our, commercial ag production is actually in North Unit and Madras area. That's been helpful. Again, getting some moisture, although October was very dry, to hit, okay, here's November and all of a sudden here's the snow. Yay, this is good. We like that. Even though the cold came with it, and we're not so sure about that part. The other thing, infrastructure. Yes, there's a lot of piping going on, but we can't forget about some of the major infrastructure. One of the frightening things I heard this fall was that the gates failed at Haystack Dam. So rather than having storage at Haystack, that, okay, that doesn't do much for, winter time, but it does mean it's the start of irrigation season. They've got a pool of water close by to the farms there in North Unit Irrigation District. Well, the pool is empty so that they can work on the gates. That means we're gonna have a slow start to being able to irrigate next spring. And the concern is always, okay, this is our food production. I worry about that. I worry about the climate, our groundwater, all the different pieces of how we live on this planet. And, what are we leaving for our children and grandchildren? And those are my comments. I wish it was more hopeful, but we're getting snow.
Hold on to that.
I'd just really like to say how excited I am to see all the work that the department's doing, and as being a commissioner for a short period of time, all of the money that's been injected into the department and the positions that all the work went into to being created, and that is starting to have an effect of showing up of that work coming online, and it's starting to paint a picture of the direction that the department is going, and I'm excited about that. As the weather has changed locally, it kind of eases the tension, and maybe there's some hope to buy some time. And the Lau Lake Dam, which is a huge irrigation project for my specific geographic region, has been delayed a year, which is unfortunate, but it's positive that it's still moving forward. And as I reflect upon these times, I just understand that I represent the entire East region, and how water fortunate in my specific location that I am, and that I probably need to reach out and understand the tribulations of Southeast Oregon, which is completely different from where I'm from. And thank the staff for making this in-person meeting available, and Nirvana for pulling it off flawlessly. And I'm excited. I'm excited to move forward, knowing that there will be some huge challenges, and hopefully we can help navigate those.
Thank you, Lee. Commissioner Quince, would you like to have the floor?
Good morning. Thank you. yesterday, Director Woodcock brought up the generosity of the legislature and the, massive increases in staffing in the department. And I want to thank all of the staff who are involved in that growth. I know that managing that kind of growth that quickly is a big task. And we now are, gaining the resources that we've long thought the department needed in order to be effective. And I think that's great. I appreciate the staff's work. And I think we'll need to maintain that staffing in light of, like Commissioner Lee's comments about the increased interest in the legislature about water, which is great to see. I appreciate people like Representative Owens and Helm calling attention to this and sustaining that interest. But in order to meet that interest, we will need the people to develop and manage the information and to do the work of these issues forward for Oregon and its stakeholders. Also, the comment about a kind of water management plan. I hope that I'm not sure what they're talking about specifically, but I hope we can call attention back to the IWRS and make that a living, document that we implement and use, not create another product if it's not necessary. And so we can hopefully bring that forward and make it more actionable, and the stakeholders can see how we're using it. And I think that will include integration with other departments like ODF&W, DEQ, ODA, land conservation and development. So a lot of great opportunities there. And finally, I also want to thank Nirvana for the hybrid meeting setup and everything working so well. I appreciate the opportunity to participate this way. And I really recommend that she not work at all this weekend. So
I will accept that direction, Commissioner West. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Thank you to all of you commissioners for your comments. Always interesting perspectives and new information. Appreciate it. I want to add thanks as well to all of the staff who made doing everything you do and also made yesterday possible. Specifically, I'd like to thank Doug Woodcock, our acting director, for all of your efforts in stepping into this role. I'm sure it's not been easy, although I don't know. But anyway, we really appreciate that. And Nirvana, of course, you're the best. You've done a great job with this. So I wanted to update a couple of OWEB items. I'm going to take my glasses off so I can see my paper. So the first one has to do with the climate, which yesterday you may have seen in the drop, the department's publication, which is fantastic. I want to say that FERC yesterday signed off, gave its approval of the dam removal project in the Klamath Basin. So OWEB also had an item at its last meeting related to the Klamath dams, and I don't think I mentioned this in this meeting before, so I just going to kind of run through it quickly. So the work is expected to get underway soon, I think, and we had a visit from the governor's office at the October meeting from the governor's natural resource policy advisor, Jason Miner, who was following up on an earlier visit from Richard Whitman, who was then the policy advisor, having to do with OWEB funds being committed to restoration post dam removal. And so the current funding for restoration is coming from two sources. 250 million is coming from California taxpayers in bond proceeds. 200 million, which everybody makes the point, has already been collected, is coming from PacifiCorp customers in both Oregon and California. But apparently during the FERC process, concern was raised about whether even with the risk contingencies that were built into the proposal, whether that was going to be enough money to do the restoration. And so in March, the governor's office approached OWEB about the idea of, well, let me back up. The states, Oregon, California, and Pacific Corps decided to each put in as a contingency fund up to 15 million each for cost overruns, specifically in the climate restoration process. And the request was made to OWEB for OWEB funding to be where the up to 15 million of Oregon's share came from. So in March, the board kind of signed off on that money being an appropriate, or that type of activity being an appropriate use of OWEB funds, given our charge, what OWEB's charge is. And then at this meeting, the board actually, the board was asked to and did commit to 15 million over 3 to 5 years to go into this effort. And we actually amended the current biennial spending plan to include about $4 million for climate restoration work. I don't really know whether there's any reason to think this funding will have to go out the door during our current spending plan period, but it's in the works now, and the OWEB committed to keep it in spending plans going forward during restoration work. It's described as a contingency, but it's committed, so I don't know how contingent it really is. But the other thing that was really interesting at the OWEB meeting was an interagency panel on water. Raquel Rancier was one of the participants in this, and OWEB organized representatives from the governor's office, DEQ, ODFW, and Water Resources to come and talk about water initiatives going on across the state and how they dovetail with the work OWEB's doing. And OWEB, of course, was also appropriated funds, that additional funds for specific water-related purposes during the last couple of legislative sessions. And so it was really kind of jaw-dropping to have this whole panel of water people talking about what all the agencies are doing. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who reported and what they were reporting on. And to be honest with you, this summary comes out of the staff report. They each covered far more material than was in the staff report, but it was I couldn't take notes, it was coming so fast. So I'm just going to stick with what was in the staff report in terms of what they talked about. But so ODFW has a new habitat division, as you guys probably know that. And they're working on drought resiliency and identifying priorities areas of the state for aquatic habitat protection and restoration. So that's a great thing. I mean, that's more proactive, I think, than they've been able to be maybe in the past. DEQ reported on its TMDL development, the total maximum daily loads for impaired water bodies, and its work on the water infrastructure database that we heard about yesterday, which is also a very exciting effort. They have the lead on this early stage, what do you call it?
The data portal.
Yeah, and the scoping aspect of it, right? That's kind of what's underway now, the data portal, exactly. And then Raquel spoke about the IWRF development and the state-supported regional water planning task force, which I'll talk about briefly in a minute. And then also some legislative concepts that we have that might be interesting to OWEB, which include continuation of split season leasing, continuation and extending the time period for which these leases can be in place. Is that right? Sorry, Raquel.
Chair Reed's commissioners, the in-stream leasing, split season leasing concept removes the sunset date and also removes the 10-year limitation on being able to use split season leasing.
Okay. So that, of course, would be an interest to OWEB as well, because OWEB grantees do split season leasing. And then also place-based planning, extending place-based planning. So that's kind of the OWEB report. The state-supported regional water planning task force, I've spoken about that a couple times. Representatives Helm and Owen and Representative Reardon put that task force together. It's a pretty it's kind of a broader base of participants than we've had on most water task forces in the past. I think. They have been working diligently for almost a year and expect to have their last meeting in December, and then a report that will go at least to the legislature, possibly to this commission as well. And it's kind of, the focus has been, in the end, the focus was place-based planning and kind of improvements to the plan system. So more to come on that. Last thing is that interagency panel that I just talked about got me thinking about the extent. It feels like there's so much more collaboration among agencies across the state. And I don't know if maybe partly as a result of this new infusion of money, or maybe it's been going on before and I just wasn't as aware of it. But it got me thinking also about, I think it was Eric who brought this up yesterday, a couple of meetings ago, we were talking about having the commission try to do something with other natural resource agencies. And also in connection with that, the idea of a retreat came up. I think Commissioner Clemps brought that up. And I'm thinking maybe in the fall, we can try to talk about, or we can talk about maybe trying to put some next fall, that is after the legislative session, trying to put something together. I just don't know how feasible it is. That's a lot of people. I mean, I know a retreat is feasible. I don't know how feasible it is to do a retreat or any kind of meeting with that many groups, but we can talk about that. But it seems like I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. Maybe people think that would be a good idea.
Commission Palooza.
First of its kind. First of its kind, exactly. Okay, I think that covers the commission comments. So our next item is the director's report from Doug Woodcock.
Okay, thank you, Chair Reeves. To follow up on the point about a retreat there, I think there is interest there. And I think let's take some time over these next few meetings to tease out what that might look like. Scope that a little bit to make it productive.
Yeah.
Which commission might we want to meet with? You know, what is it that we would like to try to accomplish with that? So yeah, that sounds good.
Right.
Well, Chair Reeves, you stole all my thunder about the Klamath River.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There's gotta be more thunder.
We can keep talking about it.
Well, it is such an exciting time right now. I mean, that is big news. It's been in the works for a very, very long time. And to actually get that level of approval to move forward on the decommissioning is a remarkable event. And let's remind ourselves, we're looking at 240 miles of habitat that's going to be opened up now for salmon and steelhead. It's been blocked off for what, 100 years longer than that. So that's just really remarkable event. So I'll touch on a couple of things today outside of Klamath. But while we're on Klamath, let me raise just another issue here that there's lots going on in Klamath. There's so much going on. But something that I want to acknowledge is that you saw in the director's report that the Klamath Water Master Office has moved. That's great. They're going to have an open house in I think it's unfortunately next week, just before Thanksgiving. So I think a lot of people already have some plans. But I also want to share that our long-suffering water master, Danny Watson, is retiring in February of next year. And we would have loved to have had her here so we could acknowledge her tremendous work that she's done. That didn't work out this trip. So I would like to see if we can bring her into the next meeting in March, so we can have a nice sit down with Danny. So I'll transition over to some budget update. We have developed our agency requested budget and submitted that in September. And it's a little bit different this year because we have a governor transition that's happening here. And so the normal process would be, we would submit the agency requested budget to DAS. It would get refined by the governor's office. Some things would be picked up, some things would be dropped off. And there would be a governor's recommended budget would then be submitted over to the legislature. Because of this transition, this governor is not putting together a governor's recommended budget. And so we've submitted our ARB to DAS. DAS has taken a look at the long-term forecast and is within that is seeing a recessional economy in the future. And so that, along with the point of having an interest in the new governor having as much resources as she would like to work with, the new, excuse me, the DAS has, and the budget analyst has forwarded a budget that is not as rosy as we have seen recently. We don't have the resources quite like we did, but the analyst recommended budget is an 8.2% reduction in the current service level. And as you may recall, and is in your binder, all of the policy option packages that we have put together, and we were aggressive in the packages that we forwarded over for work next biennium. There were 20 of them. They've all been rejected in the analyst's budget, but that is not just us. That is agent across the spectrum of agencies. They're doing that. And then the budget analyst is then recommending some of them be added back in. And so we had an opportunity to sit down with the budget analyst and the chief financial officer for DAS and the committee and appeal those changes and those reductions. And of the 20 that we submitted, 10 of them were recommended to be added back in by the budget analyst in the development of his budget, his recommended budget. But then we came back and said, we think all of them should be in there, but we understand and appreciate the budget analyst recommending some of these people back in. All of this just goes to back to DAS, who will tidy it all up, and then it will be presented to the new governor, and the new governor will take all of our appeals into consideration when she develops her budget. Her budget is due in February, by February 1 of next year. So we've got some time to wait and see what comes out of all of this budget process. So we'll talk a little bit, shifting gears here, a little bit about the tribal task force. And I will look to Commissioner Quimps too. I have not been part of the tribal task force. Tom Byler was on that as the director of the agency. So I think the first, perhaps, maybe it was 3, maybe it was 4 meetings. Tom was involved in that. And Commissioner Quimps has been engaged in all of those. So if he would like to, he can certainly fill in around the edges here what I missed. But back in, September of 21, I think it is, there was a letter submitted by the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon to Governor Brown, requesting that a tribal task force on water be developed. And the governor turned to the Water Resources Department and asked us if we would take the lead on that. Director Byler did, and we hired Oregon Consensus to help facilitate that task force. And the way it was structured, there are 9 federally recognized tribes. There were 9 water agencies that were part of this task force, 9 water related agencies. that were part of this. And so the first 3 meetings, I think it was, and Commissioner Quince, help me out here if I get this wrong. I believe how these first meetings were run is 3 tribes would come forward and talk about their values, their histories, their story for all of the state agencies that are there. And 3 of the state agencies would come forward and talk about their mission and how they integrate with the tribes, what they see is how it is that they're supposed to consult. And there's a recognition that their consultation is a very big issue here between the state and all of the tribes. And so they went through the 3 meetings there, which were basically an introduction to each other. And there was a lot of communication in there as well about shared values and where the participants on the task force think we need to be going as a state agency, as state agencies and the tribes and our coordination. And through that work, there is a recommended, or I should say, a draft report that has been put together so far. It's still in review amongst the task force members, but that draft report has a series of recommendations in it. And in those recommendations moving forward, there are items like, I've got a few things written down here I want to share. A recognition of integration of cultural values, consultation, and how it is state agencies can perform their early engagement around consultation, improvements in communication between state agencies and the tribes, an improvement in state agency coordination ourselves. The tribes often, I think in the conversations around the task force, there was a recognition that we don't know who to go to. There's overlap in state agencies' responsibility, sometimes around water, and the tribes want to have a better understanding of who they should be going to when they have particular issues. A recognition of gaps in data and information. The tribes certainly would like to see that, and state agencies as well. And so I'll talk a little more about that when I talk about the data portal in a moment. A large interest in restoration by the tribes and water reuse opportunities. There is an interest in by the tribes of incorporating cultural values into state agencies' policies moving forward. So these are all things that are laced in this draft document with recommendations under each of these key themes. So this draft report is, before I move on to the conclusion of the draft report into a final, there was one major point that's right at the top of the task force draft report, and that is that there should be a working group that is formed moving forward. So the task force is going to be concluding their business here soon with the conclusion of the draft report. And there's an interest in putting together a work group that would be state agencies and tribal representation to work through these recommendations moving forward. And as part of these, I mentioned communication. That is going to be a really big piece of this working group moving forward. And how is it that we improve this communication? How is it that we understand what consultation means to each of the tribes? Because it doesn't mean the same thing to each tribe. And so we think that fundamentally this is going to happen. We don't know what it looks like in the task force conversations. This is something that is being put forward as a really good idea, but we just don't know what the structure is going to look like just yet. Is this working group going to be represented by tribal leadership? Is this going to be more at the staff level? So just lots of things like that. So the task force report is hoped to be concluded before Governor Brown leaves office. She has been so instrumental in working with the tribes and elevating the issues around the tribes. And I was at the tribal task force, the tribal summit in Florence in early October. And it was heartwarming, I have to say, to be there in person, because the tribes had so much to in honoring Governor Brown and her work that she has done with the tribes. And over her tenure, there were just a lot of speeches over and over and over. And there was also by the tribes at that summit, an appreciation for the governor's work on the 100-year water vision, and wanting to make sure that that continues and that the tribes are included in that continuation. So I would just offer Commissioner Wimps, if I missed anything of import that you would like to present from the tribal perspective, I'll give you that moment.
Thank you. I think it's a great summary. I would add to that in addition to the tribes presenting to the department directors, the department directors then turned and presented, various departments whose responsibilities touch upon water, explained both their responsibilities and their authorities and how they relate to water. Another idea I think that was recommended in the report, in the draft report, is the notion of co-management and actually using the integrated water resources strategy as a mechanism to kind of facilitate co-management and address goals and in the IWRS that are beneficial to multiple communities. I think people might forget that the resources tribes have in terms of staffing, long-term knowledge of landscape and ecology and resources to help develop projects and implement them to benefit of multiple communities. So that's something that's going to be in the report. And I think it was a good process, and maybe when the report is concluded, we could have a presentation of it to the commission in early next year. Thank you.
That sounds good, Commissioner Quimps. Let's think about that for the March meeting.
I would love that,
That'd
yeah.
be good. And oversight on my part about the co-management, that's another piece that's very prominent in the key themes in the report. The last thing I would like to just touch on today is the data portal. You heard about that mentioned yesterday. And I am so sorry that perhaps some of you had some conversation with Ben Scandella, who is in the office or in the room here today. He is our point for the subject matter expert, which is a committee for the data portal work. And he was with us yesterday on the tour, and he would have been a good opportunity there at dinner last night to hear from him a little bit about this. He knows far more about this than anyone else in the agency, tell you. But that won't prevent me from continuing to talk about it. So you heard the scoping from Chair Leaves from the OWEB report there. And that's exactly right. So what happened is, as part of I think predominantly the 100-year water vision, though the IWRS talks about the importance of data as well. But the 100-year water vision and the work that was done there out of the governor's office and the director of OWEB at the time, Maida Lopsgaard, was the lead on that for the governor's office. There was a lot of interest from the community meetings that were held that there are data gaps out there, and data can be hard to access as well. And so with that, a policy option package was put together to develop a data portal for the state of Oregon. And what the data portal intends is to be a one-stop shop where people primarily focused originally on data managers, decision makers, but we've learned clearly through our place-based planning work that there are community interests out there in being able to access data as well. And so this is designed portal so that there is integration of data across agencies. And then as time goes on, expanding that to federal data out there. There's local data that aren't out there as well. But this first part was an investment by the legislature to DEQ. I don't recall what the total amount was. It was a few $100,000, 350,000, something like, am I in the ballpark?
350.
350. Okay, keep me honest. The first part here is to do this scoping, and that is what would it take to do this? And so this is all about the design. So Ben and others have put together public outreach to talk about this amongst different communities, tribes, and different stakeholders and those data managers as well, to talk about what this is and could do and to gauge interest and get input on this. So that stakeholder outreach has been conducted. Coming back, generating a report for the legislature in, is this a December report, Ben, for the legislature?
Sherry, members of the commission, we will submit a report to the legislature in January, I believe, potentially early February. The full report will be put out in June.
So the second report is, will be for the final report will be for the legislature in June. And then there will be an additional ask, or there is an additional ask of the legislature for the second phase of this. And that is actually putting together a pilot project, looking primarily at the data that are available today in a format that can be integrated. Still going to be a lot of work, significant undertaking, but there will be a pilot project to see how this can work, to see whether this is feasible and what it would look like moving forward. It's going to take much more investment by the state to make this a fully operating data portal for the use that is, has been visioned, if you will. So that's the framework of the data portal moving forward. Any questions on that? Because we have our subject matter expert.
Is the focus right now specifically Oregon state agency data in terms of what would populate the portal?
I believe that would be the initial for the pilot project, yes, but there has been conversation of all of the data sets that are out there. And is it feasible to integrate them? And then even beyond that, it's not just the data that are available today. What data do you need to make decisions that we are not collecting today? And then what would it take to actually collect that information and make that available? Again, potentially big investments to make that kind of data portal a success.
Other questions?
Just a comment, my memory is my first memory of this being discussed was pre-COVID 3 years ago, I think, at the annual Oregon Business Council Business Summit in Portland, when the gentleman from Duke presented. And so I sure hope that we're not looking at this as something that's exclusively on the state's shoulders, because I think private investment is warranted and would be good vested approach to things. So I figure a lot of businesses would do well to, and I think be encouraged to participate financially.
Okay, that conclude your
That
report?
concludes my report.
All right, so thank you very much. Let's reconvene at 10:20. We're a little bit behind schedule. And we are on. All right, thank you. So we're reconvening this meeting of the Oregon Water Resources Commission. One thing I'll repeat after each of our breaks, the fact that these microphones that we're using are super sensitive and they will pick up conversation, even super quiet conversation anywhere in the room. And it will end up on the recording. So please keep that in mind as we're proceeding. So let's see, our agenda item, our next agenda item is approval of minutes. All the commissioners have had a chance to read through the minutes. Commissioner Parks, yeah. Okay. All right, can I get a motion on these minutes? All right.
To approve the minutes from
Commissioner
September
Spindler.
1st, 2022.
All right, thank you. Second, I just have to, Commissioner Kinkara is seconding the adoption of these minutes. Any further conversation? All right, let's take the roll. Commissioner Wolf,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinkara,
Yes.
Commissioner Spindler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Mall.
Yes.
Yeah. Commissioner Lee, yeah. Commissioner West
Yes,
and Commissioner Reeves says yes, and the minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, next is Justin for the groundwater allocation project.
Hey, good day, Chair Reeves and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here and the Oregon Water Resources Department. Please give me one moment to pull up my presentation. The first time I don't need to ask what you're seeing. All right, there we go. Okay, so today I'm here to provide an update in an ongoing series of updates on what we're calling our groundwater allocation project. That's the project in which we are working to develop groundwater allocation policy that we expect to culminate in rulemaking that will lead to more sustainable and protective policies for groundwater allocation going forward in the future. The most recent task in this project was that we held a series of public outreach meetings in September and October of this year. We had 5 facilitated meetings, and we wanted to seek input on reimagining the groundwater policy ahead of drafting kind of an initial set of rules that we'd like to put eventually in front of the commission. And we held 5 public outreach meetings over that time period. There were 4 hybrid meetings, Salem Bend, Central Point, and LeGrand, and then 1 that was online only. We had oh boy, now my notes have disappeared. It's on 2 screens. I want to say we had more than 400 participants total, online and in person. We received more than 100 public comments and an additional 50 pieces of feedback through other channels that we've integrated in. So I'll be talking about those later on in the presentation. This was the agenda for our public outreach meetings. I spent about 35 minutes giving some background, little groundwater primer, little discussion of our existing allocation process and some of the issues that's led to. And most of the meeting was dominantly taken for this public input session to answer folks' questions and to gather their input. So that was really the point, and that's where we put most of the time on the agenda. And so today, I'd like to briefly recap those background concepts and spend again most of our time going through input that we received and kind of summarize that for folks. We provided well, I should say our facilitator was Kearns and West Consultants. They put together a pretty lengthy document that summarized all of the public comments and had in appendices the actual survey comments that we received. So all the details are in that very large document. And we provided to you, I think, the upfront summary portion of that as well in the materials. I said during all these public meetings, and I'll say again here, that what was presented was really based on a number of commission meetings and staff reports going all the way back, I'd say, to at least 2016 in my tenure. We put together a summary sheet that summarized those key meetings, or at least what we saw as the key meetings, provided direct links to the staff reports, provided links to recordings of presentations up on YouTube so folks could get to them. And I guess for anybody watching today, as well as for commissioners, I'll just say that all that background information, as well as full recordings of our public outreach meetings, are available on our website. And that's what I'm showing up here right now. Is top picture is just a picture of our homepage. Wanted to highlight the news and updates section. And that in that news and updates section, there is a link to groundwater allocation project, and that's where all this background information can be found. And going forward, that's where we're going to be posting all the new information we create as we build up to the rural adoption. So these bullets are what I want to present today in this kind of a choose your own adventure opportunity for the commission. As far as the key groundwater concepts and the allocation issues and potential solutions, these slides are dominantly things that that folks have seen before, either in commission meetings or anybody that attended any of the public meetings. My intent is to breeze through them pretty quickly in a 15-ish minute time frame. That being said, if folks have a desire for the full presentation that I would give, I'm happy to do that too. That runs about 30 minutes. So I just want to take your temperature. Yeah.
I have seen your presentation.
All right,
Good.
perfect. Yeah, good. Just making sure. So, and as I breeze through these things again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions along the way. And again, for folks that might be in the audience or online, all this is recorded, and I'll make the last pitch to go to our website, and you can get links to all those recordings there and see the full presentation. All right, so with that, just a real brief review of going through the key groundwater concepts. The point of this was to make sure that we had folks with some baseline understanding of these public outreach meetings, so that we're clear about how the groundwater system works and what we're looking to do with respect to our policy and rule adoption on how we allocate groundwater rights and how that fits into the physical system. So we talked about what is groundwater, water in pore space below our feet. Talked about what groundwater is part of the hydrologic cycle, and that it's a dynamic and flowing part of the cycle. So it receives recharge, there's flow through the system, and it discharges in many cases in Oregon to support stream flow. Took a little closer look at how groundwater discharges to streams and what that might and how that supports base flow. Gave a kind of a different look, a thought experiment of looking at this picture happens to be of a stream that's flowing in August, September after several months of no rain in the valley. There's no snowpack above the stream, there's no dam. So trying to get people to put together that this is groundwater discharge, this is base flow, and that this base flow is always present in streams, but forms the largest percentage of stream flow in the summer months. And that is the time at which the earliest users in our prior appropriation system and in our treaty obligations to indigenous folks before that, this is what they depend on, right? They depend on groundwater discharging to streams. And that when we develop groundwater, we are essentially both, especially in early time, we're starting to pump a little bit of the dynamic storage in the system. But over time, with the hydraulically connected aquifer, we are capturing flow that would otherwise discharge to streams. Tried to make that a little bit more clear. Gave a kind of semi-quantitative graph of how the source of water to wells works. Water from storage making the dominant proportion in early time, and with hydraulically connected streams, water that's captured, or what's called stream flow depletion, growing as pumping goes on, pumping time goes on, and approaching 100% at late pumping time. So again, developing groundwater, especially in hydraulically connected systems, over the long term, is essentially developing base flow, right? That groundwater was going someplace before development, and development kind of picks up water along the hydrologic cycle before that groundwater can discharge to streams. Said that in words to just again get it across in a different format. And then ended with, just summarizing, hopefully after that kind of baseline background, folks can agree or see that our allocation of groundwater over the past 65 years has contributed to reduced surface water base flow and groundwater level declines or reduction in storage in various places across the state, and that comes at the expense of our existing users, our senior users in this prior appropriation system. So from there, went on to talk about some allocation issues and potential solutions. Issues arising from our existing allocation process and some initial ideas for updating the allocation process. Pointed out this composite hydrograph in the Harney Basin, which is one of our most recent and really visible examples of a place where I talk a lot, especially in the background, about the hydraulic connection with streams, but there's some aquifers that aren't really well hydraulically connected. This is one example of a kind of a volcanic subsurface deposit that's isolated from surface water bodies and a lot of recharge. And in that case, storage does provide the dominant source of water to wells. And over time, as development increases, that storage starts to be reduced, and that's seen with falling water levels. So also talked about where we do have hydraulically connected streams, that our current rules and process are such that we protect against short-term acute impacts to surface water, while cumulative impacts and long-term impacts typically have been allowed to occur. So in my shorthand, I say, hey, we are looking at impacts within a year or an irrigation season for wells within a mile of streams. And if the impacts are from wells that are further away, which is a big determining factor in the timing of impact to stream flow, and or where impacts build over time, and where multiple allocations of groundwater have cumulative impact, those have not in the past been looked at as a significant reason to deny a new application. So we want to look at those long-term impacts with this this new policy and future rulemaking. We want to make sure we look at cumulative impacts. Also, this last bullet, we've been, we've been requiring historically data to exist in order to indicate over appropriation, and we're looking at our definitions of over appropriation and how we assess the amount of data we have in our statutory criteria of having a preponderance of the evidence to determine these things. We want to make sure that our rule language is such that we can make
positive determinations one way or another with respect to over appropriation and therefore whether or not water is available for new allocation. So kind of a rehash of one of the problem statements is that due to our current laws and rules, or under our current laws and rules, or I should say rules and policy, more than 70% of groundwater applications in the past decade have resulted in a permit, and approximately 80% of those have come in these areas of concern that we identified back in June of 2001. So that's concerning and has kind of been the catalyst for taking a closer look at our allocation process. So I've iterated on this presentation over time, and I've tried the slide content is the same, but the titles have evolved over time, and I've tried to put these problem statements into the context of the source of water to wells, of storage being the source, certainly in early time for all wells, and into later time for those in non-hydraulic or poorly hydraulically connected aquifers. I've talked about the definition of reasonably stable. This is a term from the Groundwater Act of 1955 legislative policy that the department shall determine and maintain reasonably stable water levels, and how the state has only defined reasonably stable in 2 critical groundwater areas in the Umatilla Basin, and how we have defined excessively declined, or the opposite of reasonably stable, but how that leaves, how that's fine in this example. This set of wells around Mount Angel meets the definition of excessively declined, and indeed we haven't been issuing in this area for quite some time, even though it's kind of outside of our administrative boundary there, the Mount Angel groundwater limited area. We're still, if we get an application in this area, we haven't been issuing because of this record of water levels. But then I went on to show some examples from the Deschutes Basin where it was less obvious, and spent some time going through these multiple hydrographs from multiple wells across the basin, and how none of these hydrographs have yet met the definition of excessively declined. And so that makes it difficult from a groundwater reviewer's viewpoint to have a definitive yay nay on saying is water available for future allocation, and therefore addressing this, what is reasonably stable is something that I consider an important aspect of this groundwater allocation process. And then I went to the capture side of the source of water to wells. Cited, this is again, this over appropriation definition is 2-part, and I've only clipped out kind of the second part here, where we talk of, or where the rules say that over appropriation says that groundwater sources over appropriated if further allocation will result in further depletion of already over appropriated surface waters, and how over the years through policy and our Division 9 rules, we've taken that definition and really constrained it down to this within a mile, within a year assessment structure, and talked about how that could be problematic, because in this case, this is a modeled stream depletion, and this isn't actually related to an allocation question, but happened to have it on hand, and it is a more specific and quantitative view of a well that's many miles from its hydraulically connected sources down gradient. So from a Division 9 standpoint, we wouldn't look at this this impact, but if we did, we'd be looking at the impact way down here in the first year of pumping, where stream depletion is about 3% of the pumping rate. However, in this modeled scenario, over 30 years, that stream depletion has risen to 85+% of the pumping rate, right? And so that's in general the case for wells and hydraulically connected aquifers, that over long periods of time, we're going to see the impact or the amount of water that comes from base flow reduction grow to approach 100% at lake time. And that's an issue because we've got, as we know, we see this plot quite often. This is August water available stream flow for new appropriation from our water availability reporting system, and most of the state is already fully appropriated in the surface water realm. And so if we are issuing groundwater rights that are hydraulically connected, we're essentially nicking away at already over appropriated surface water lines. So something that we'd like to, I like to address. And then we also talk about regulation history as a tool that we'd like to use to get kind of our on the ground water master observations of streams taken into account in our allocation policy. So with that, again, that was kind of the first 30-ish minutes of our public presentations, and then we had conversation and comment. And so for the rest of my presentation to you today, I'd like to just go through and kind of summarize what we heard. Before I do that, any questions on the first two sections there?
Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so in these meetings, again, the point was feedback, and we tried to accommodate feedback in many different ways. So of course, during the public meetings, we were there to answer questions. We took, and I should have said verbal comments maybe. And also we had stations set up, this lower right photo, where folks could give us written comments if they didn't want to stand up and give their comments verbally in front of the group. So we collected written surveys at the meeting. Anybody that attended remotely in the hybrid meetings could fill out those surveys online. So that was available, and those surveys were open, I think, 2 weeks after the meeting as well. So folks could think about it for a while and give their input a little bit later. We also accepted a good deal of kind of feedback by phone and email and after meeting conversation that we tried to document and make sure that we got that into the feedback pool as well. So again, these meetings were facilitated by Kearns and West Consultants, did a great job of helping us keep on track and make sure that we got everybody's input that wanted to give input, and they also summarized the results for us that I mentioned at the beginning of our spot here. And they kind of summarized comments in a few kind of overarching groups. And so this first group, they turned to hopes, what do people hope happens during this process? So these bullets that I have up here are kind of representative of where we received multiple comments on a theme, right? So this is, each of these bullets is more than just one person that's wanting us to, or that hopes in this case, that we have a transparent rulemaking process. So we're of course committed to that and doing our best to make sure that folks understand the process and know how and when they have a chance to provide their input. Folks hope that we would have a diverse representation of both interests and geographies across the state on the Rules Advisory Committee. We put together a number of one-page summaries. So Danielle and our growing policy group really helped us out there. And we heard positive feedback about that and desire for additional kind of short, succinct summaries of the issues and process steps. And then in the right-hand column here, folks hope that we consider public impacts, statewide interest and local conditions, vulnerable communities and various specific communities, rural communities, as well as fish, wildlife, groundwater dependent ecosystems, is that GE acronym, and in-stream rights.
What was that acronym?
Groundwater dependent ecosystems. Okay, in the concerns category, again, folks had concerns about our stated interest was we need to write statewide rules, and I still think that that's important. Folks recognize rightly so that there's local variations in how our groundwater systems work, as well as how our communities work. And I think that I heard many times that folks wanted us to take local variation and local considerations into account. And so we've been thinking about how to do that. Again, from my perspective, I think a statewide baseline rule that provides some sideboards is important. And perhaps we can think about how additional input through our basin program rules or some other pathway might allow us to take local conditions into account as well. So these next two have asterisks next to them because they aren't really going to be affected by the rules, but we heard this a lot. We heard concerns about exempt uses, right? So right now exempt uses are specified in statute, and that's not something we can change by rulemaking. Not something that will be changed by rulemaking. So so folks are concerned and thinking about exempt uses, but that will be part of this rulemaking. And also applications that are currently pending. Again, we're reviewing applications under the rule set that exists when they come in, and so this new rulemaking isn't going to affect apps that are currently pending, but folks are certainly concerned about that and you know, and we brought that up. They brought that up and we talked about it during these public meetings. On the right-hand side, we heard also folks discuss the need for legislative action, not just rulemaking. That typically came in the form of, you know, people's opinions or expressions of, hey, is prior appropriation really the right tool for water management going forward, right? That was implemented in a different era for different purposes, and values have evolved in the last 150 years or so. We heard concerns about the Deschutes mitigation program, both that it's working and please don't change it, and also that it's not working and please change it. So that's actually another, you know, the Deschutes mitigation program has its own, of course, set of rules and review timelines and what have you that run in parallel to this, but certainly we understand that our rulemaking is likely to interact with the Deschutes Basin mitigation program. We're taking that into account to make sure that we do that with intention. And lastly, folks expressed a lot of concern about the ability to use groundwater to lessen the effects of drought or drought effects on surface water, so supplemental groundwater rights, as well as the ability to use groundwater in the short term to, for example, establish crops like grapes or hazelnut trees or other things that apparently, you know, presumably once they're established, their root systems are such that they don't need to be irrigated going forward. So next category here, data and information. Heard a lot of comments about areas where we have, I've said minimal data here, less data than desirable. And what is our default decision going to be where impacts, and I put cannot be determined in quotes here. That's of course a category that's on our current groundwater technical evaluation review form under the question of is the resource over appropriated or not. And it's been a lot of conversation about what to do with cannot be determined, and our goal for the rulemaking is to set up a clear set of rules and definitions such that our hydrogeologists can feel confident with the preponderance of the evidence and our best available information, making a yes or no decision about over appropriation, which again feeds up into is water available in the statutory language and leads to a decision of is the public interest presumption met or not for an issuance decision. So we want to address that in our rulemaking. We also heard comments about gathering more water level data through our OBSWell program, considering climate change projections and how we assess water is available. And also, again, creating more data and information communication tools. We heard folks request maps for real-time groundwater level data, those types of things to help people just continue to understand the groundwater resources of the state as easily as possible. And then lastly, we got some bonus, some bonus recommendations. This was, at least for me, this was the first time that I had been out and about in the state for a couple of years, and certainly you could tell there was pent-up demand for folks in all areas of the state to reach out and talk to us. So we received several comments on on these three, in particular, but other ideas as well. Folks were really supportive of water conservation and efficiency, and we heard, hey, please support that, please fund that, please do more. Same with artificial groundwater recharge, especially in areas where we're seeing declining water levels or are have found that we're over appropriated to see if we can enhance recharge to those areas. And also the desire to see more defined mitigation programs in other areas of the state. So the Deschutes right now is, I believe, are only defined in rural groundwater mitigation programs. So there's a desire to see those types of programs in other areas of the state. So again, none of that is going to be affected by this current rulemaking process, but the current rulemaking process brings up these concerns and considerations, at least in the series of public meetings that we held. All right, we also asked just a few kind of specific questions with specific choices, and folks could select more than one response, but we asked specifically, hey, we proposed these criteria that we think that we should take into account: trends in water levels, surface water regulation history, surface water availability. How do you feel about that? Of 110 survey respondents in this case, most of them agreed with trends in groundwater levels and surface water availability. About half of them agreed that we should bring the surface water regulation history in as a criteria. And then maybe 30 folks or more had other ideas that they would put in there and specified for us. Similarly, we asked about the time frame that we should be evaluating impacts of additional groundwater allocation, especially on surface water. And again, folks could choose more than one. So there were 111 responses to this. Short term was 50 folks thought 1 to 5 years, 60 folks thought 5 to 20, and almost 80 thought 20 to 50. So people are obviously clicking more than one going up, but just the trend toward more people agreeing with longer term look at the impacts is kind of what I take from that. We had some similar kind of yes/no questions for, hey, should we consider climate change? That's certainly something that we heard before the public meeting, so wanted to again take folks' temperature. I'd say the majority said yes. We got some no's. Similarly, how do we deal with areas where we may have insufficient information? Most said, apply the precautionary principle or deny a new application or request more information from the applicant. Others said, we think you're doing fine as you are, continue on. So, I think trending toward more folks can feeling that we should consider climate change and that we should apply a precautionary principle. And so that's the general summary of what we heard. Last slide I've got for you here is just talking about our future next steps and our updated rulemaking timeline. So first of all, right now we are starting to develop draft rules, and we're going to be taking this public input into account. So I had mentioned at previous presentations that we, or maybe Doug or I had, I can't remember, we have a relatively small team of folks from across the agency that are focusing on these rule drafting and providing input. So we've got representation from most of our divisions, I guess not our administrative services division, now that I think about it, but field services, right services, technical services, all involved there. We're going to continue our consultation and discussion with the Groundwater Advisory Committee. So I gave them a similar presentation on Tuesday. Got their feedback as well, let them know that we'd be continuing to engage with them along this process to get their feedback. We plan to appoint a Rules Advisory Committee this upcoming spring. We anticipate multiple Rules Advisory Committee meetings. Yeah. And I should also say that during these public outreach meetings, we also had a checkbox for attendees to say, hey, would you like to be involved in the RAC? So we also solicited interest in folks to sit on the RAC at those public outreach meetings. And then right now, given all of the additional rulemaking that's on our plate, that's detailed in well, there's more detail in the staff report, but we've obviously got other things going on, both with respect to groundwater as well as wells and other things in the department, and kind of sequencing all that rulemaking together. We're anticipating that we'd like to bring final rules for proposed adoption in the fall of next year, so September, October next year. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Justin. Commissioner, question, comment? Maybe, take this please.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Clemens, did you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just curious, I'm glad to see that you asked if there were people who were interested in serving on the RAC. What could do you have like a number or anything on how many people?
I don't have the exact number, but I'm pretty sure we're 30 plus at this point.
30.
Thank you. Justin, did you get a sense, and maybe, well, I didn't ask people about this, but I'm just curious what kind of, if you were to categorize the people who were interested in this as like existing groundwater right holders worried about their systems, people interested in new developments, people just generally interested. I mean, do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, good question, Charlie. I don't have a sense of proportions that I'd be willing to conjecture right now, but I can say anecdotally, there were certainly irrigation interests there. There were certainly domestic well users. There were folks representing environmental interests. It seemed to me that we got a pretty good cross section of the community of interests at this meeting. So I was pleased with how many different viewpoints we did.
Right. Did you have a question?
Oh, sure.
Go for it. I always stick with you.
This is, we have till 11:30, right? So we can have a discussion.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Should
sure
we
love
stretch?
it.
Should we stretch? Should we stretch first? First of all, a couple of things just over the top, overall, try not to be over the top. Thank you, but Justin and Doug and Raquel and others for keeping this front and center for us, because since, what was it, June, a year and a half ago, when, I think maybe the first time we saw the presentation of the county sits, and just were made aware of some of the issues that better data, more time, more expertise is brought to bear. You've been coming back, and the iterative development of good thinking about the data, public outreach, proposed next steps in rulemaking. I just find that really, it helps because it stays fresh. So thank you for that, and thank you for the progress that you're making despite all of the challenges, limitations. I was able to participate remotely in the Southwest meeting, and again, there too, I applaud you, folks, staff that were there for handling a couple of things. I was, when I first saw the meeting agenda, there's quite a bit of time up front for people just to get together and mingle. And I think that that does so much in terms of building trust, so that it, alleviating some of that, you're trying to take something from the attitude that I think really gets in the way a lot. And I think that you all handled yourselves remarkably well in the face of, at times, really pointed opinions as opposed to questions. So bravo, keeping that going. I'm curious, a couple things that I guess is really a question. A little over 400 people participated, and then a little over 125 responded. I'm assuming that of that 400, a lot of those were duplicates, that the same people attended multiple meetings, or do we have any sense of that?
So, yeah, Chair Reeves and Commissioner Mull, we do have a sense of that. I haven't summarized it yet. So yes, we have the attendance lists, and we just don't have them quite yet summarized, and that would have helped answer Chair Reeves' question as well. So that's certainly something we'll do.
I would propose that most of the voices are voices that we've heard from before, that have pretty strong agendas, rightfully so, that they're pushing. That was a good opportunity, and that'll get distilled down, and we'll have those same voices in the rack. I'm curious how you all felt from just a process standpoint. When I think about a big policy like this, which is policy by its very nature is on behalf of the larger public, and regardless of the policy, I don't think there's been any policy in history that didn't have some impact on some individuals, some ways, that was inconvenient at best and harm at worst. And to me, when I looked at the interview questions, especially, I was struck, it kind of seemed like at times we're asking the public how to tell you to do your job. Whereas I feel like, we're learning increasingly how law, statute, rules put sideboards on sort of the empowerment staff have. And I wonder I guess it was good to see that you were able to distill out from a lot of those comments how people on those margins that are potentially going to be inconvenienced or harmed by new rulemaking, for example, or a policy that recognizes how different the water situation is now. Did you find it effective? Do you feel like from that sense we've learned things that a lot of the things that were listed you've presented before? You kind of know that's your job. You're professionals. You know these things. Were there surprises that came out on those margins, considering how some of these questions were asked?
So, Chair Reeves and Commissioner Mull, I don't think there were big surprises. I mean, certainly we've heard the end member comments. I guess what I would take from the summary, what I've taken so far from the summary of comments is we're on the right track, not necessarily telling us how to do our job or not, but we presented some ideas and some directions we're headed and how do you feel about those, and the majority was supportive. So that's I would have been more concerned if the majority wasn't supportive, that I need to expand my thinking. And I'm not saying I'm not going to continue to be expansive in thinking and considering, because there's a lot of details to work out, but I take from that we're on the right track. So I'm moving forward with more confidence, and there's little details and considerations that people brought up as well that are good to have a reminder of, oh yeah, well, we should be considering this as well. So we're gonna try and take those into account as well.
That's good. It's good. I mean, I hope that make it second nature for us to all to attend to these things with, hey, wait a minute, this is gonna impact me this way. And whatever we can do as a department to really create these kind of forums where people can talk about that larger picture of Oregon. And recognize that, yeah, I'm not the only one who's going to either benefit or experience inconvenience or harm, and sort of step back from the competitive. Well, I gotta get my I have to take care of mine. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. Oh, TV's about, the TV's about. to turn on.
Distracted by the countdown.
You get there in time.
30 seconds.
It's actually on the TV power button.
So get up to that.
We have a momentary technology break for those of you watching from a distance.
Yeah.
You just touch the
That's
screen.
why it's good that I'm not the IT person. So I just be punching at the screen.
Yeah. That's like anything on the-
Yeah, I'm just like.
Oh,
Just reboot, right, Kim?
There's only a single button on each. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you get up to that?
Have comments continue to come in? Is feedback continue to come in after those?
Yes, yeah, I think that we tried to do a pretty good job of setting up kind of an end date for the Kearns and West folks to wrap up and summarize, but certainly we continue to get emails in rack interest and those types of comments, so yes.
Great.
do we have other commissioner questions or comments? Don't see any hand up, I think, huh? We have, thank you, Justin. What are you pointing at?
Saw Eric came off of,
Oh, Eric, did you have a question? Comment?
No, I didn't. Thanks.
Okay.
sorry.
We have, request for public comment on this item. So well, I think I'll invite those guys up here and then, I don't know what it will be asking to hear from you again, but thank you for this presentation. Very helpful. I did have another, oh, I know. I think we kind of have a standing request for an update on this process at each commission meeting. But would like, it's great to have this happen, so I appreciate that. So, we have Adam Sussman and Mike Bittner. Is that the right? Okay, thank you. That's impressive. Central Oregon Cities Organization. Yeah, I think, oh, sure, yeah. The mics will work more.
Chair Hughes, Commissioners, thank you. My name is Mike Bittner. I'm the Utilities Director here for the City of Bend, Oregon. I'm here today wearing my COCO hat. That's the Central Oregon Cities Organization. 8 cities in Central Oregon, representing roughly 150,000 water users in the region. I want to first just say thank you for the opportunity to be here and provide some comment in person. I think this is my first in-person commission meeting, and so I'm still a little rusty in three-dimensional interaction. Grace, I would echo a lot of Justin's comments. It was good to have staff out doing the 5-stop road show. I fully recognize it takes a lot of time and effort to put those together. You're right, Commissioner Mall. It was nice to have some time at the beginning to sort of just mingle and get to know one another. It was my first time at being introduced to Justin and some of his staff and other OWRD staff. So it's just good to kind of get the rust off and get the group out there. There was a lot of good interaction. I will back it up. You heard it from all different directions. It was a diverse meeting. The Central Oregon one was. Municipal interests were there. Myself and Paul McDaniel, City of Sisters Public Works Director, attending.
And again, just appreciate the candid back and forth that we're able to have on this issue. So I have a few comments I wanted to just share with this group, largely in support of the directions that you're all heading, really just to help influence and mold some of the next steps, hopefully. So one of the things I wanted to call attention to was the recent white paper that COCO commissioned. Our Central Oregon Cities leaders really wanted to have some additional information, some things that we could hand off to our city managers, to our councilors, to our county commissioners, really help bring some of the information that's out there, the peer review related science together in a digestible format. Something that you don't need to be an engineer or a hydrogeologist to really understand, something that we can all sort of collectively wrap our brains around in Central Oregon, something that we can share amongst our communities as well. And so we have a hard copy of that here. I think we submitted a copy of that as part of the comment at the public meeting as well. There's a lot in this paper, but there's two things I wanted to just draw attention to. One, something the Deschutes Aquifer is very thick, roughly 1,000 feet thick in places. And so when we talk about groundwater level declines and we think about things that are pretty significant, say a foot decline in a well from 1990 to date, right? Like a 32 foot decline. That's a significant decline that water managers and hydrogeologists and engineers will notice and manage. But it is a 4% decline when you look at the saturated thickness of the aquifer. And so the reason I share that context is to really just emphasize I think the practical and I think the measured response that we should approach this with versus any sort of quick, knee-jerk, broad reaction. This is a reduction. It's significant. We notice it. We're managing it. It's happening over a course of a long period of time, 30 years, where we've seen expansive growth in Central Oregon. The second thing I wanted to mention from the paper is that the groundwater flow system in the Upper Deschutes Basin is not over appropriated in our opinions. When you look at the science, when you read through this paper, we think that you'll agree with that. There's over 4,000 cubic feet per second of recharge in the Central Oregon region through the Cascade Crest. 2% of that is used annually for pumping, for groundwater pumping. So when you look at the context, again, we just want you to make sure that you have, I think the most relevant and recent peer-reviewed science to develop that appropriate measured response when we update these rules. So I guess with that, we're urging the commission and the department to really think about the unique geologic framework of the Deschutes Basin and the Central Oregon region, specifically when you're updating these rules. That includes taking a closer look at the mitigation program at some point. Justin touched on this a little bit, and I really agree with a lot of his hopes and concerns slide. I like the bonus material you got there. I have not framed additional comments as bonus material, but I like that. That's a good way to do it. There were a lot of comments in the meeting I was in that led me to believe that there wasn't a thorough understanding of the mitigation program and what it is, and what its impact on groundwater level declines actually is. I heard some incorrect statements and people that are pretty distant from the program. So I think that there's some confusion generally, even in Central Oregon, about what the mitigation program is and how cities and environmental groups are using it to restore flows in the middle and lower Deschutes. Okay, so that's an area where I think we need to spend some time. It is a good program when it's up and functioning and isn't under speculation with the cap and the sunset. When it is in place, it is a good program for us, and municipalities really want to come out of this groundwater allocation policy effort with a functioning mitigation program. Let's edit it, let's iterate, let's do what we need to do. That's a really great framework for us to use moving forward. A couple of other last key points here. Let's rely on the science. We have done a ton of science in the Deschutes Basin, a ton of analysis and studies, probably more so in the Deschutes Basin than we have anywhere before. We should be able to say and determine that water is available and provide some certainty to municipal water users, to groundwater users. Okay. And finally, I know this was mentioned earlier with the RAC. I think we're one of 30. COCO would love to be a part of that Rules Advisory Committee when it does come together here later in the spring. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That was really the comments I wanted to get out here in front of the commission. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming. Questions, comments, further questions? Commissioner Clinton, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair Reeves, and thank you for the comments. I caught the comment about the geologic framework, and that during Justin's presentation, I was thinking about a Rules Advisory Committee. The makeup should hopefully reflect some of the different geologic factors that affect groundwater in Oregon and those differences, you know, pretty different east side and west side, and, you know, some unique factors, I think, around central Oregon. So I appreciate that comment, and I just want to say I support, you know, some deliberate thought about how the makeup of that group, so we hopefully adequately represent that diversity of geologic conditions. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you for your presentation, and I really like the way you laid out these various graphs in the report. Much more detailed than the old blue whale. We all know well.
Yeah, we're still using blue whale.
So, Chair Reeves, do I get my own 3 minutes as well? And it's great to see everybody in person. I feel like it's kind of a little party for me. So good to see you all. So for the record, I'm Adam Sussman. I'm with GSI Water Solutions. I'm here on behalf of COCO. And I think Mike has covered most everything, but for those of you who know me, you know I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to say a couple more things. So so first, I'm really glad we had the opportunity to show up and hand you this white paper, because it's a good read. And when we started building this white paper, we kind of asked a lot of questions. Who is this for? Who's our audience? And we kept saying, the Water Resources Commission should be reading this. So that was kind of our, you know, thinking, decision makers, policy makers. And what we really wanted to do is just help you understand, you know, water levels are declining in different places for different reasons. And I'll let the hydrogeologist talk more about that, because I'm not a hydrogeologist. But what we really wanted to do is get some experts about that have expertise in the Deschutes Basin and really lay out what is going on in the upper Deschutes Basin in the regional aquifer. And spoiler alert, those water level declines are not being driven by groundwater pumping. Groundwater pumping is contributing in some way to them, in a small way, but it's Mother Nature and some variability in our climate and precipitation that's driving those groundwater levels. That's going to make a lot more sense when you take 20 minutes and read through our paper and kind of follow that train. There will be a quiz next commission meeting. So I expect you all to study. And it really talks, Mike's already talked about the thickness of the aquifer, the recharge mechanisms. We talk a lot about the variability in the climate over time. We've seen water level declines like this in the past in the Deschutes. And so we're just urging everybody to think about the long history and to stay calm. Let's be rational about how we approach what we do here. The second thing I wanted to mention is there was a point that Ivan made at the meeting in Bend that just really stuck with me. And I wanted to just kind of express this to you. He said something along the lines of, you know, the commission really doesn't like it when people's wells go dry. And I just kind of like what my daughter said in middle school, ditto that for COCO. Okay, we totally agree. That is a terrible, terrible situation to wake up in the morning, to do whatever, make coffee and find out you have no water. Those folks need help. Okay, this is a big problem. But what we need to understand is in the framework in the upper Deschutes Basin, in that regional aquifer, what's going on? Why are people's wells going dry in the regional aquifer? And what we understand, again, we have an aquifer that's 1,000 feet thick. But in the 70s and 80s, we had a lot of wells, potentially hundreds of wells that were drilled for domestic or other uses that went into that aquifer 30 feet into 1,000-foot thick aquifer. Why did they do that? Because it was cheaper to construct your well that way. Okay, so now over time, these wells that were drilled in the 70s and 80s, we have had water level declines in some cases of 30 feet because of changes in the climate and variable precipitation, and those wells are going dry. Okay, but the question to you, I want to leave you with this question: Are we gonna manage a 1,000-foot thick aquifer because some folks drilled their wells 30 feet into it and now they're going dry? Is that like, does that make sense in terms of the long-term management of an aquifer and that situation. So these are things that are happening in the Deschutes Basin that have rational, science-based explanations. And so, again, I mean, I think Justin talked about people saying, let's talk about local impact, local frameworks, local geological impacts. So we want to make sure, and we've told Justin this a lot, that in the Deschutes, we need to think about these things. And we're here to be a partner, to collaborate with the department, be on the Rules Advisory Committee. We just want to do something that makes sense. So we appreciate your time. We know you guys have a ton on your plate. We know Justin does. And we just wanted to make sure we give you some good information by which you could make your policies.
Thank you, Adam. And Mike, yes.
I'd love to respond to that. Sure. My answer is yes, we should be managing with the recognition of that, even if it's only 4%. That's somewhat tongue in cheek, but not completely. I do appreciate you guys coming. I really appreciate this, and it's one of the beauties of the Deschutes Basin is that you have such a long history of good work and investment and money. I mean, that there's no question that what you're able to do is because there's huge demand for land in the Deschutes Basin. Dramatically changing landscape in that basin. And bravo for getting ahead and keeping water in that land use discussion going. So one question or request is, I don't know if you tracked any of the discussion yesterday, but in looking ahead for the integrated water resources strategy, we discussed a fair bit. How do we bring land use into this so that it's not just, hey, there are these land use decisions and let's kick it over to the water use decision and then kick it back, but really integrate things. And I think some of the things you're doing in the basin could really help inform that. So I hope you'll bring that to the department. I'm also interested how, if you're willing to share in the year or so it's been since we discussed the cap and feedback that you got, that, yeah, we're a little uncomfortable raising a cap and maybe we should reconsider it. What's happened after that in terms of sort of, for example, is this white paper a response to that? And okay, the other considerations besides simply the percentage available, that kind of thing, but as what we use water for shifts what the basin looks like. I'm just kind of curious if you're willing to share some of what that discussion's been like for you.
Adam, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot at that, Chair Reeves and Commissioner Bold. How do I say this? This groundwater level decline issue has been a distraction from the cap and the sunset on the mitigation program. And this paper is not at all about the mitigation program. In fact, at all. It's really focused on just understanding why are the water levels declining in the Deschutes Basin. So it's not about that at all. And I do want to reiterate, as I listen to the presentation for maybe the third time now, I'm thinking for the folks in the Deschutes, thank goodness they have a mitigation program. Because remember, that mitigation program is not to mitigate groundwater levels. That's not what it's about. It's about mitigating impacts to surface water. And so thank goodness that we have that. So I think right now, what we're trying to do is, there are people that don't like the mitigation program that you may have heard about. And they're saying, well, why should we even talk about a cap and a sunset? Because we're having these, horrible groundwater level declines, and the commission is never going to allow another groundwater permit to be issued ever again. And I would disagree with that. I think we're going to come to a rational conclusion about how to allocate groundwater in the Deschutes Basin. And with that, we are going to need a functioning groundwater mitigation program. I mean, these cities are planning 10, 20, 30, 50 years out in the future. Right now, there is I'll let Mike explain, there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now, which is not a great way to run a utility.
Maybe that's where I chime in. I think that's where my anxiousness and nerves come in as a utility leader. As a water manager, somebody who's overseeing the financial stability of water, sewer, storm, $50 million a year operation. right now is the time when I sit in front of my CFO and my city manager and really develop my budget for the next 2 years. Part of that process is developing a rate strategy so you can have budget in, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, however you budget. We're not having meaningful conversations about the cost of future mitigation, because we don't really know if there's going to be a functioning program. So to answer your question as far as what's happened, I'd say very little, and I'd say, probably nothing. It has been a distraction in a good way. I mean, we're focusing on other important issues. But if anything, we're just a year closer to the sunset, which increases the level of speculation. We do field interesting phone calls from development community, from water rights, professionals that are offering mitigation credits at astronomical prices. I won't even bore you with, they're so confusing to me. And I don't know what's more burdensome or what's more worrisome, that there's this wide speculation happening in the industry in Central Oregon, or that, somebody thinks I have that kind of money in my budget. It doesn't happen. Really, where I worry that this is headed next is really if you're a business, if you're an industry and you're looking at relocating to Central Oregon. These companies do their homework. I mean, they understand their water issues and what they're looking at. And so if there's any scent or hint of instability or uncertainty with terms of long-term water supply portfolio, those companies move on, they go find somewhere else that has more certainty. And so that's where I feel like we're getting into sort of an economic development area with the region. And I think that's where my city management, my councilors start to get a little bit nervous in the city.
Yeah, that's why I feel like the land use nexus is so strong and the speculation around it is so strong. And it behooves us to really bring it to bear and appreciate keeping that front and center. I'm curious from a ratepayer standpoint, we on the east side, on the west side, in the Kennebec Basin, continue to find that ratepayers are very supportive of increased rates if it's associated with the health of the ecosystem, the health of the river system. You find that as well, or especially among your new ratepayers that, what I know from a utility board perspective, oh my God, if we raise it another $1, they're going to come screaming at us. But for the bulk of the ratepayers, it's not true. The bulk of the ratepayers are absolutely good. They see what they see 50 years down the road. You find that on the east side.
I'll put my city of Bend hat on and answer that question. Yes and no. I'd say that we've experienced quite a bit of growth in Bend. A lot of the growth has come from Bay Area, west side of Oregon, Seattle, all over places that have water scarcity issues and have conservation ethic, right? So they come and they actually kind of drive us forward in that arena. So in that area, I would say yes, but I would say no in the fact that we are, reaching some key thresholds and just in terms of how we talk about water. The average cost of the bill for us is, in that $120, $130 per month range. You start to look closely at that and you know that can't just keep going up. There's going to be a spot where people just can't do that any longer. And so the overall affordability of rates is sort of keeping that at bay. So balancing both of those to produce an affordable, sustainable approach is the craft of rate strategy, I guess.
Thanks again.
Yes, Julie.
I just, thank you, both of you. I just also want to acknowledge all the conservation and efficiency work that you've done in your area, in the city of Bend, city of Redmond, and the surrounding areas, because I think that is still very important, and there's a lot of opportunity for increased efficiency in just about every sector. And so all of that is on page 1. They've listed out all their efficiency. Really, I think that's something to watch. So, thank you.
As a resident of Bend, thank you very much for the work you do. And, the dispute mitigation program, I was kind of on the fringe of that, working for reclamation when that first started up. And like you said, thank goodness we've got the dispute mitigation program and the collaborative spirit that is Central Oregon. I think that's something that's kind of special in the state, that it's still, hey, you're in Central Oregon, be nice to your neighbors and let's work together because we're all in it together. And it's a nice way to be. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
COCO plans to be kind of a persistent presence during your groundwater allocation project. So I'm sure we will be talking again soon.
We'll welcome that, and thank you. Let me add my thanks for this report, which I will read when I can.
Thank you.
And appreciate your work.
Can I just add, thanks to GSI also for the work you're doing on the Central Coast. Sure. The city's yachts, and there's really, really helpful to bring science to bear on really serious water shortage issues that we have.
Thank
All right, till next time.
you.
Thank you.
Next time. Thank you.
Justin, thank you. And I believe there is no other public comment and that adjourn our meeting. So I'm gonna bang. Do it. We're adjourned. You learned how to use that. thing.